Hello and welcome back to another episode of Critical Reactions with your host Bryan. We're going to wrap up this whole week's theme of death metal checking out a band called Horrendous, which that sounds exactly what I would expect from a death metal. I'll tell you what though, all 5 days this week I think, the bands sound like death metal bands. They all just have a gnarliness to them. We're going to be checking out the track Obolus off of their Idol album. So let's dive into this and see what's going on. Really interesting phrasing here. Love the bass work. I love those little melodic flourishes, but the harmony on them. I think at best I'd call this 9/4, but I think it's shifting as well every 2 bars. Really interesting. Just putting them way up there. Harmonizing them, have the width, the reverb. The call and response, of course. Loving the bass work, man. That stuff's so good. What is this phrasing? I love the way the guitars and bass synchronize and then split and then synchronize and split. Yeah, so this is in 4/4. It's just really funky accenting and phrasing. Yeah, pushing between downbeats and offbeats. I think that's yeah. That's our third vocal style. Really interesting for a lead instrument to obscure their sound, especially when it comes to guitar tone, rather than to make it clearer. Oh, what a beautiful transition. That quick twist in the chord progression with the metric modulation in the drums. So clean. Yeah, the sound is expanding and contrasting. Love how the bass is a part of that gallop. Okay. Ugh. The bass just really putting in that funky accents on our guitar rhythm. Oh, yeah. Yeah, so we brought in this compressed lead guitar centered again, and we got the clean vocals up top. I don't recognize the foundation though, but it's really interesting. We have at least 2 callbacks from different sections. Transition. Oh, I honestly figured it was going to pull us into the next track. Yeah, so death metal hitting again. Like I said, I think this is the genre, the genre of extreme metal that I tend to enjoy the most. I think I said that yesterday, Wednesday. Yeah, especially the proggier, techier, mellower, mellower, melodic. Uh, all the subgenres of death metal tend to do pretty good by me, and this one falls in line with that. So, what are they doing here? Hmm. See, that's a really good question. This song's kind of all over the place if you didn't pick up on that. Um, a lot of these songs are crafted based, or songs. a lot of these sections are crafted on similar composition techniques, and I think that's what I'm really going to have to talk on. Just anything that's more dense like this, so many layers, so many sections. It's more difficult to speak about specific moments. It's easier to talk about things as a whole. But the thing is that there's a lot of really neat things going on more of a bird's eye view on this stuff. So it's not, I think it's not going to be any less interesting of a video. So let's get into it. Um, First things first is just the bass. Can we talk about that, guy? So like, it's weird to talk about the bass without talking about the guitars first, because I do feel like the bass lines are based on the guitar work. I do feel like frequently the bass is done as an embellishing idea on what the guitars are doing. And I do think on a compositional level, whoever writes the music ends up writing the guitar licks first and adds the bass second, at least on a majority of the licks on this track, or the riffs on this track. Um, I'm not going to say that that's probably how they do it across the board, but at least here, a lot of the ideas feel guitar first. But the guitars to me aren't that interesting, primarily because it's melodic riff writing. All right, there are pedal tones. They're not utilized too often. A lot of the ideas are melodic in that they sit around a note and move around between it. Sometimes there's jumps, but there isn't an over reliance on returning to a home note. Um, there are some riffs that utilize it, but it isn't a primary aspect to it, which is one of the strong elements of melodeath that I'm picking up on. One of the big differences between melodeath and regular death, or even tech death in some cases, is pedal tones, utilizing your home note often. Um, and then our two guitars are harmonized on top of that. I don't think there's any moment where they're playing separate ideas or when they're playing the exact same notes. It's always the same concept, different note intervals, which is really cool, and we'll touch on that in a bit, is the interval composition. But the bass tends to do something along the lines of the guitars, and that they accent or embellish specific aspects that the guitar is doing. Now, this isn't something that always happens. There is one really cool riff we're going to have to look at um, that I absolutely loved. But for the most part, the bass is either doing the same thing they're doing, but finger picked, which means that we have a different attack to our timbre. And an octave lower, sometimes 2 octaves lower, which means we have different range. But it's usually the same thing, which is really cool because the guitars are doing some technical fast stuff. It's really nice to hear the bass being able to do that as well, especially when we went to that 16th note concept there at the end. It was like 2 or 3 minutes before the ending, and the bass just had these super funky pops on the accents while doing these really fast notes. Just phenomenal. Absolutely love that. Giving the bassist a chance to show off some dexterity, some speed, being light on the fingers. Just, yeah, you don't get to hear it too often, and it sounds so good there. But aside from that one specific situation, the bass is usually kind of creating the trifecta of the rest of the guitar work, where, as I had mentioned, they're playing the same thing, just with different notes. So we're getting dyads out of this, especially on key notes. If we are sitting around uh, an idea and kind of crafting a lick, a lot of those will be the same interval. And the interval is just the distance between the notes. So if you're looking at a piano and you go from one white key to the black key sitting next to it, that is a half step. If there's two white keys next to each other with no black key between it, that's also a half step. If you go up two, whether that is to the next white and then the black, or to the black and then the white, that is a whole step. And you can see all these as distances between notes, how many half steps or how many whole steps you are away. And that is our interval. And the different intervals are going to have different characteristics to them. And once you start stacking intervals, that's where you start making chords, and chords all have different emotional elements based on what your different intervals are from within in it. And so when we have this dyad, usually the distance between the notes is going to be the same, right? They just move. But when we get to the end of a riff, usually the end of a phrase, right? Maybe it's a 2-bar phrase, maybe it's a 4-bar phrase, maybe it's neither one of those because the time signatures in here are so wild. Anyways, we get to the end of an idea, and you can feel we're going to loop back to the beginning now, right? They'll usually change up the interval, not just against what the interval was for the majority of that riff, but also what the interval was when we ended the riff last time. And so we actually have a bit of a progression on the larger scale, even though if you look bar to bar, you're like, oh, they're doing the same thing. They're always a fourth apart or something like that. Then you get to the end, you're like, oh, well, after the fourths, they're always a fourth apart. Oh, now they're a fifth. That's interesting. Oh, they're back to fourth. So you're like, oh, this is just cyclical. But no, when you start looking at it at the larger picture, you notice that it's always moving. Every phrase is different, even if it's just the interval at the end of the phrase. There isn't a repetition to it entirely, which is really neat because it kind of tells a forward progressing story if you're looking at it from the much larger picture, not bar to bar, not phrase to phrase, but section to section. There are some really interesting changes that happen where most bands would not introduce change. They would just write something, an 8-bar idea and repeat it over and over, rather than making these small nuanced changes to the intervals, which help tell the emotional and chordal story. So that's one really neat way to do it, or that they're doing this and injecting some cool ideas in here. But we were talking about the bass. I don't know how I got on that topic. Anyways, the bass is usually doing what the guitars are doing as well, which means we have 3 notes going on. So instead of a dyad, which we've heard a lot of this week, we hear a lot of in black metal, we actually have a frequent triad. And since they're changing intervals on the fly from moment to moment within a section, sometimes within a phrase, we're actually getting some really complex interval manipulation going on across the entirety of the song that makes each section feel hyperlinear despite the repeating ideas that form the foundation of it. It is gorgeous. This is 100% functional and efficient composition where it achieves the emotional storytelling through as little work as necessary to make something that can feel very comfortable moment to moment, but still tells a larger story, not entirely based on the loops themselves. It's so good. And that doesn't even speak about any of the unique situations. While most of the sections are built on this triad harmony concept, there are some that focus more on the rule of cool textural things. There was that one section I was talking about where we had our 2 outside guitars form. I think the bass was in on this too. They were all playing the same thing, getting our harmonies out, but every time we finished the phrase, we shifted over to this really compressed, center-placed guitar that did like a call and response riff, but it was like right in the middle of my head. Like I could feel it in the middle, whereas the guitars were out to the side. Right in the middle of my skull, just really jamming this one idea. And then we would call back out to or we'd have the outside guitars do another call, and then this interior guitar would respond. And we had this neat little thing going on here. There's another really neat idea where the opening phrase, like the opening 2 bars or whatever, were the bass and the 2 guitars, and they all worked in tandem with this harmonized triad single rhythmic idea. But then after the 2 bars, they all kind of split and did their own thing. The bass took the rhythmic direction they were already in and continued to do a walking bass line, while the 2 guitars went and explored different melodies based off of the riff that was originally there. And then they came back together and then went their own ways and came back together. And this was the, what I called it diverging and something else coming back together. Just a beautiful section. And so the song bounces back and forth between these moments of pure harmony where everybody works together to push the section forward, and we explore the atmosphere and the emotion of the song through these smaller interval changes and these more expressive moments that utilize the three-way melodic playing in more interesting ways that can introduce counterpoint and texture layering and production elements where the instruments are placed to create new atmospheres for the music to be crafted within. Um, it is just everything here riff wise is done so well. There's so much attention put to the details and walking that fine line between making it listenable for your average metalhead, I think, and putting and utilizing all these really intense, complex ideas to flesh it out and make it more technical than it appears on the surface. And that's just three of the instruments. We still have the drums to talk about. We still have the vocals to talk about. I mean, this is a master class in progressive melodic death metal and how to make it palatable uh, without, or how to make it technical while still palatable without moving into that too technical realm. It is just so good. So about them drums. We can't really talk about the drums without talking about time signature because the drums do a lot of time control, metric modulation, and it's difficult to talk about how they're influencing something if we haven't talked about what that something is doing. So, let's start with time signature and phrasing. We start the song off in something. I hypothesized at one point that we were in 9/4, but that did I no 9/4 is our second. Well, it was something in the middle because that was 9/4 consistently. And the cool thing about 9/4 is that it's an odd time signature. So if you continue to bob your head on every other beat, or yeah, on every other beat, you'll eventually shift from working on the downbeats to realize, or sorry, the band will shift from emphasizing the downbeats to emphasizing your offbeats. Technically, they're the downbeats of the song, but because we went from emphasizing even notes or even numbers, for instance, we have two odd numbers back to back where we go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 1. We have two odds back to back, which shifts the accented phrasing. But the overall phrase is still 18 beats, which is even. So if you feel it in the 18, we shift from downbeats to offbeats. If you feel it in the 9, you're going to get tripped up at beat 10 because you think we're going to be heading towards the next beat of the bar, and in fact we're going towards the 1. It's the restart of a phrase, or yeah, the restart of a phrase. So odd numbers are kind of fun like that when you hit time signatures, and they leaned into that real hard, shifting from the downbeats to the offbeats, or tripping it up with the restart, with the early restart of the phrase. And they didn't really shy away from that. And that actually kind of segues well into our intro. Our intro plays around with time signature in a lot of ways that feels disorienting. I still don't know what the time signature of it was. We had a group of 6 sometimes. We had a group of 7 sometimes. I think every 4 groupings was an extension of the 7 to an 11. It's quite possible that when we add all this up, it actually comes into something that's divisible by 4. Maybe it ends up at 24 or something. And you're like, oh, it's actually just 6 bars of 4/4. But it doesn't feel like that at all. And I could never figure out what exactly the length was. I'd even go to say that the first 4-bar phrase, which could be, a 6, a 7, a 6, and an 11, which is going to be a pretty lengthy phrase, is different from our next set of four phrases or four bars, which might not have followed that same pattern. It felt like the song was shifting every single time we restarted the phrase over again. And it wasn't consistent in its reconfiguration, which ended up feeling extremely dizzying, where you never knew when we were going to restart. And once it restarted, you knew where you were, but you didn't know where you were going, and you didn't know how long it was going to take you to cycle back. And sometimes the journey was longer than you expected, sometimes it was shorter. And when it was stretched out, you didn't know how it would be stretched out. Occasionally, they would just repeat the last two beats of, like, for instance, if it is a 7 bar phrase and they want to extend it to 11, they can just repeat beat 6 7 6 7 6 7. So you just kind of get this microcycle going on as they stretch this out and just reutilize what they've written and repeat it over and over until they hit 11 beats to cycle back to the beginning. It is hyper confusing in so many ways, and every time I felt that I had a foothold and I had reasonable ground to stand on, they subverted my expectations again and left me somewhere where I had no idea where I was. This is something they do a lot. The idea of tripping up the listener by uh, utilizing a similar starting point but a different ending point is used all throughout this song in ways that make it feel like you're constantly stumbling into the repetition of a phrase instead of naturally moving towards it. Um, there are some sections that are a bit more standard. There was a 6/4 that was consistent. There was a 4/4 that was consistent. We had the 9/4 that was consistent, although that also has its own little trip up there at beat 10 when we start the second bar. But the song is just consistently creating situations that feel like you're being lurched into the next section. And that is for better or worse. As usual with things like these, the more you listen to it, the more those harsh edges wear off as you get used to it and you can anticipate them. But on a first listen, the song it shifts often between feeling lost and really digging the groove of what's going on. And you never really know what's around the corner, and it creates a lot of anxiety and anticipation in the track that hopefully they are aiming for. Um, if not, then it's just technical for technical's sake. And while I think it generally works here, it's usually something I'm not a big fan of. Um, But yeah, so the time signature and the phrasing and general rhythmic patterns are all over the place. How does the drummer deal with this? They don't. I think that's my favorite part about the drummer. When we get to the 9/8 section, they just play a 9 beat phrase. I say 9/8, I meant 9/4. They just play a 9 beat phrase. When they hit beat 9 and then they go into beat 10, which is beat 1 of the next bar, they just start over and lean into that tripping vibe that everybody else is. They don't try to clean it up, they don't try to pave it over, make it a little bit more palatable. They just lean into that idea. So when we have these really wild time signature changes from bar to bar like we do in our opening section, they do absolutely nothing to try to help with that. They just make it worse. And the thing is, too, is that the drummer does a fantastic job of finding these really interesting pocket vibes, um, or pocket grooves in these complex time signatures. So you'll be like, okay, the drummer's giving us the heartbeat here. I'm going to go along with the drummer. And then you're like, this is a really great groove. And then it'll be the repeat of a phrase, and they'll just be like, whoops, let's just move, let's just repeat without a nice transition into it. And so I think they're kind of deceptive in that way, where the rest of the song is consistently antagonistic towards the listener. They're deceptively antagonistic, where it almost feels like they're luring you into a false sense of security rhythmically before dropping the ball and having you trip, just like the rest of the band does. And to me, that's really impressive to find these little pocket grooves within all the complexity to kind of give these little micro safety nets. Um, And I don't know if that undersells or oversells the drummer, but I do want to point out one other time that the drummer really surprised me was the metric modulation going on in it was one section I pointed out. It's just like the smoothest transition. The guitars shifted up their intervals to create new chords that we weren't playing around with, that introduced the new mode we were going into, while the drummer changed up the tempo of the song without changing the tempo of the song. So they introduced the tempo we were going into and the time signature we were going into before the rest of the band was there. It was masterfully done. And I'm sure there were some other metric elements that I missed with the drums because I was really hyper focused on a lot of the harmonic work that our strings were doing. Um, just, was really fascinated, especially with just the bass, man. The bass was so good. But yeah, the drummer's ability that I picked up in the times that I was actually paying attention to what the drummer was doing blew me away, and it makes me want to listen a second time specifically for the drum work and see what I might have missed. But there's some really fun metric ideas in here, especially with the way they play around with working within the time signature shifts that I think just showcases a really interesting metric mind of theirs. I don't know, drummers are wild how they can be given these complex things and find a groove within them. Like that just makes no sense to me. Always envious of drummers' ability to do that. Um, Geez, we're like 32 minutes in, and I still have things I want to talk about. This is gonna be a while. Um, the vocals. All right, this is gonna kind of tie into the production because I think that's a really important aspect here as well. I was a little put off by the vocals at the beginning. They grew on me, but I thought what was more interesting was the variety of them. Death metal isn't necessarily a genre that I think of vocal variety in. Especially some of the melodic death metal we've heard in the past that has bounced off of me. It's been primarily because while I enjoyed the music, the vocals were not my cup of tea and they were stagnant. Usually the vocalist has one harsh sound and they use it for the entire song. So I thought it was really interesting when the vocalist came in here with almost a compressed yell. It almost sounds like they have usual regular vocal cord work going on with a lot of compression on top of that. It doesn't sound like your generic fry scream. So I was like, okay, this isn't terrible. I could probably deal with this. I could listen to an album of this maybe. But then we brought in these angelic, ethereal, reverby, clean vocals that were so high up in the mix. They felt like they were above the rest of the band, and we introduced a call and response with these while the rest of the guitar work were also working on their own call and response. It was so good. Oh man, this section probably sold the whole song for me. So we had this back and forth going on with the vocals, which I thought was awesome. It ended, and we dealt with the harsh vocal that we had previously for quite a while, and I thought maybe that might have been a one-off, but the clean vocals do come back as well as a what sounds to me is more of a pure fry scream. And I was like, yeah, you know, I want to hear more of these, all of them working together. And it makes me want to explore the rest of their album to see what else they do with this because their string composition is excellent. Their vocal composition could be. It seems like an intentional choice not to utilize the two extra styles of vocals as often, but um, I really enjoyed when they came up and juxtaposed and embellished on what our core vocals were doing. Now, on top of that, the production really helps with these angelic, ethereal vocals here. But the production on a lot of these ideas were really cool too. I already talked about how we had the spaciousness and the guitars out to the side, and then the guitar in the center and the call and response there. But the bass is centered and also has a lot of presence and prominence. The bass, I wouldn't say, is exceptionally loud. In fact, it sounds a lot quieter than our distorted guitars. But the bass does have a lot of volume and presence. There are very few situations where I found myself wondering, where is the guitar? I can't hear it, which is phenomenal. There's also a lot of things going on all at once here, and they can all be heard very clearly and precisely. Just the producer did a fantastic job at ensuring that all the complexity could be heard without losing any of the grit that the sonic qualities of the instruments, the harsh vocals, the distorted guitars, the loud drums, that they weren't going to overshadow or muddy up or just complicate anything. There's just a lot of work going on here to make this a clear production while still having that dirt on it. All right, I'm going to hit the lyrics here and then we'll wrap this up. So this seems to be about the harsh realities of the modern day living. The opening stanza speaks about how the average person will be rummaged through and fully understood. He says, "You dig my grave, you run me through, show me my demons, my angels, my muse, the frayed ends of a dream, show me my saviors, my specters, my devils, my dues." Says, you'll show me everything that I am. This will get picked back up in a second, but we do have an intermission stanza that's kind of sows the seeds that we'll pick up on later. It says, "At the rainbow's end, what use are promises of Eden? To begin anew when hope is just another poison fruit." Sows the idea that there is no redemption from where we're at. We go back to this idea of you'll see everything through me. You'll pick apart exactly who I am. He says, "Dry your eyes, Sisyphus, and shoulder your burden. So do your work, right? Don't cry about it. Just do what you have to do. And in the end, they'll measure your worth by how broken you've become. And they'll give you the stone to roll again. So your reward will be more of what you've already done. And your reward will be based on how broken you are, how much of your body you've given to this, right?" It says, "Your final reward will be an obolus upon your lips for Charon's passage to the shore." So your final reward is death and hopefully passage into the afterlife. He calls it a grand mockery, a miserable play where all is an illusion. Says, "I won't take another bow." That's yeah, like I said, my interpretation of that is just a very grim look at a lot of modern reality, especially I don't know where I don't know what country they're come from, but I'm coming at it from an American point of view, and we are working ourselves to the grave. Anytime that we do good work, we are rewarded with more work, not pay raises, not better health care. Nothing that would actually be nice, just more work. And a lot of people work themselves to the grave. We have people who are retired and go back to work because they don't have enough money with rising costs of living. People in their 70s and 80s still working, which is just ridiculous. And it says it straight up right there. Your final reward for breaking your back and selling your body for all these years is death, if you're lucky. Otherwise, purgatory. There is just no relief from it. You push the boulder up the hill and it comes back down. And if you break your body enough, we'll give you another boulder to push. It is just heartbreaking and soul crushing, but quite accurate. Nothing like the music, though. I sat here looking at the lyrics and I was like, I think I got a pretty good read on these. And I was like, but what does it have to do with the music? And I still don't quite know. I'm going to assume this is one of those situations where the band just writes really complex music and the vocalist finds a way to put some lyrics on top of it. Maybe, though, if anybody has insight into this, maybe they have their own perspective, maybe an interview um, with Horrendous, I would like to know if there are supposed to be some elements of the music that tie in thematically with the lyrics. I'm not seeing any though, which is fine. The music's killer. The lyrics I can get behind. Sometimes it's all you need in a track. Those are my thoughts on Obolus by Horrendous. What did you think? Did you enjoy it? Was there anything that stood out to you or anything that I said you'd like to add on to or correct me on? Put that stuff down in the comments. Above the comment section is a description box. In there you'll find a link to Linktree. It takes you to this menu right here. It has links for a ton of stuff. And some selected ideas are ways to support the channel. You can find my music, the Discord server, and there's a lot in there. Go ahead and check it out. Above that, if you could, like, subscribe, and ring the bell. I greatly appreciate all three of them. All right. We got a special selection coming up next and a creator request. Otherwise, I'll be back tomorrow, 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 10 p.m. UTC for a album review. All right, until next time, remember to be critical, not cynical, of the music you listen to, and have a fantastic morning, afternoon, or evening, whenever you choose to watch my videos.